great pleasure for me because I've been trying to get Lyonel Trouillot at NYU for some time. In some cases, my Haitian colleagues say, when are we going to bring him? Because he's the major, for me, a writer living in Haiti, but also bringing Haiti, Africa, and the diaspora together. When he leaves here tomorrow, he's going to Cotonou and so on. So he's always on the road or in Haiti. Activists, politics, and writing all come together. And I tried, but finally we have succeeded in getting him here at NYU, and I'm really proud of that and very happy about that. It's a major writer of the African world, from Haiti, but also of this, as Glissa would say, tout monde. He's a major writer of the tout monde in that sense. Born in Port-au-Prince in 1956, Lyonel Trouillot, I'm translating French to English, so please bear with me. He studied law, but was fascinated by literature and the arts, very early on, and published in magazines, in reviews, poetry, journalism, but also short stories and so on. So from very early on. I was fascinated by this. It was always there, but I guess I didn't pay enough attention to it, that he actually wrote texts for music, which were interpreted, sung by very important musicians. I did not, it was always written in his biography, but I didn't know. For people like Tambouli Bey, Mano Charlemagne, Toto Vicente, who's very big in Senegal and other places. So I'm really happy to know that actually that he wrote a text for such great musicians, Jean Coulange and artiste indépendant. He's professor of literature, journalist, co-founder and co-director of Les Cahiers du Vendredi, and then also co-founder reviews like L'Arc-en-Ciel, Thème et Langage. If my pronunciation in Creole is wrong, please forgive me. Many of you are familiar with his work. I will just cite some of the novels. He has several novels in French. He has short stories and nouvelles in English, in Creole, and poems. So he's really well-published man. But let me cite some of the novels. Les Fous de Saint-Antoine, Traversée rythmique, which was in 1989. Le Livre des Maris, 1993. Rue des Pas Perdus, which is in English, it's available in English. And Rue des Pas Perdus is 1998. Thérèse à 1000 morceaux, 2000. Les Enfants des Héros, which is also in English. Bicentenaire, 2004. L'amour avant que j'oublie, 2007. Yambalou pour Charlie. What is Yambalou? Can you ask? Merci. Pour Charlie. La belle amour humaine. Parabole du failli. And several short stories, narratives, what we would call here non-fiction narratives, poetry in French, poetry in Creole, but also edited several books and special issues of journals. And then let me give you just a few distinctions, awards that he's received. Prix du gouverneur de la Rosée du livre et de la littérature. Many of you know the gouverneur de la Rosée, the master of the view, which is at least was the classic that we had to read when we were in school. You can't get around it. Jacques Roumain. So Prix du gouverneur de la Rosée in 2002, which is given by Le Vendredi Littéraire. And then 2005, Prix de la télévision suisse romande for Bicentenaire. Bicentenaire actually won so many awards, so let me just give you some of them. Prix Velper Fondation, but before that, Prix des Amériques insulaires et de la Guyane, also for Bicentenaire. Prix Vepler Fondation, La Poste pour Yann Valou pour Charlie. Chevalier des Arts et des Lettres de la France. Le Grand Prix du roman Métis pour La Belle Amour humaine. Prix Gitangeli pour La Belle Amour humaine aussi. And then my favorite, the prestigious Prix Carbet. He also won that with people like Edouard Glissant on the jury for Parabole du Failli. And I gave you the translations for some of his texts. I want to read two things before I began to improvise, because I really, first, Jaira wanted me to read one, but I have one that I want to read. Jaira wanted me to read a quotation that she had. I come from the Haitian professional middle class. I grew up in a family where children went to school. My father was also a professor of literature, among other things. And so, as a child, I was already familiar with literature. Writing is a tradition in my family, and being the youngest in the family, I was introduced to literature at a very early age. I went to a very liberal Roman Catholic school in which we were taught to pay attention to all that was happening around us. And in Haiti, one does not need to look for something to write about. I guess at a very early age, I was already fascinated by the world of words and pretty much aware of social problems and issues. Now let me read now what I wanted to read. This is the interview that many of you know in Kalalou, the interview he gave to Kalalou. I wanted to read something about language there. And I guess the question was, what are the implications today of your generation writing in Creole? What does it mean now to write in Creole as opposed to French? And here is the answer for Lyonel Trouillot. For some writers, it is a political choice. As you know, political issues have invaded the field of language with French versus Creole and vice versa. Many of those who write in Creole consider their writing as a conquest, a legitimate revolutionary act. Unfortunately, they tend to write anything in Creole. During the Duvalier period, for example, writing down with Duvalier was considered as poetry simply because it was written in Creole and the upper bourgeoisie and the government were against the use of Creole. I don't think this political conquest was a good thing for literature, because many forgot that in order for Creole poetry to be poetry, it didn't just need to be in Creole, it also needed to be poetry. But there are many among us who write in Creole because it is our language. When I began writing in Creole, I was one of those who thought it was right to do so if you wanted to reach the people who could not understand any other language. When I write today, I write in Creole because that is what comes to me naturally. So I wanted to read that. And Chaira is, you already here? Tu as ton texte? Ah, fantastic. Fantastic. Because doing some readings to pass the time, and the man is here. So please help me to welcome Lyonel Trouillot. Voilà. Non, tu peux rester là.
On va mettre là, vous me cachez.
Non? D'accord.
Vous me cachez là.
OK. Merci et welcome to NYU.
À quelle distance? Vous m'entendez là? So, I really do have to do it in English?
Some of you remember how much hard time Glisan gave me to get him to speak in English. That is the tradition here. So yes.
Well, I believe the theme is the Caribbean imaginary. I don't know what that is. I don't believe there is. Bon, c'est pas faute, moi, je suis assis. Bah, trop haut. Yeah. The Caribbean imaginary, so I don't know what I'm going to talk about. I don't believe such a thing exists. And I don't believe, considering the reality of the Caribbean, that such a thing is possible in our days. And since I don't really speak English, I'm trying to use some very short sentences, sometimes using the form of questions, and using fragments anyway, and for you not to totally waste your time listening to me. So it's just a few questions and fragments about the reality of the Caribbean and the constructions that we sometimes, scholars, writers, intellectuals from the Caribbean, we make of the reality. And I believe there is too great a distance between the reality and what we say about the reality of the Caribbean. What if the theoretical and rhetorical constructions about the Caribbean, such as insularity, métissage, enracinérance, and all the blah blah, making the living and in some cases the fame of Caribbean scholars, have little to do with the actual conditions of living of the populations of the islands and territories we call the Caribbean. I was in Puerto Rico recently, and it was about the Caribbean. I was in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and there was the Cari Festa. And I went by myself to the countryside in Puerto Rico, the countryside in Haiti, I know. And I can tell you most of the things I heard had nothing to do with the reality of the people, and particularly the poor people in the Caribbean. So sometimes I wonder, what in the world are we talking about when we're talking about the Caribbean and making those constructions like insularity? I hate that word. Or métissage, which is to me even worse. What if we, scholars, intellectuals, and even writers and creators from the Caribbean, are more and more blind to the material conditions of the lower classes in the Caribbean and more inclined to dialogue with our peers in the main Western world than with the people of the Caribbean? What if, before speaking, we should ask ourselves for who and to whom do we want to speak? What if the only talk about the Caribbean that would make any sense would be, is what I am saying contributing to a body of ideas capable to help change the material conditions of existence of the people of the Caribbean and the true expression of individual and collective artistic and cultural identities?